Hello, friends. Mm.
Hey.
Good to see everybody. Mm.
Yeah, this is fun. Always fun. And
Always good to take time to see who's here if you would like. Check out the different pages. Mm. Hope everyone's doing well.
yay. Okay. So asking you to let your attention kind of settle in to your body. It can sometimes feel like we're tweaking the attention a little less forward or back. Maybe welcoming earth element where our sit bones connect with our bench, cushion, or mat. Or the welcoming and receiving earth element, hardness, softness. When we bring our attention to hearing, sometimes you can bring the wisdom in with that understanding that anything can happen moment by moment. We can actually receive that understanding. Anything can happen, and being with things just as they are. So not trying to get anything or rid of anything. Just accepting the vibrations, textures. Just checking to see, can this wise attention receive these vibrations and textures just as they are, as they're happening and disappearing. And with the sensations in our hands, similarly, understanding anything can happen. And just being with whatever appears just as it is. As much as we can without the visual image. Of course, the memory of the visual image will come and go. That's just seeing or thinking. And then just letting that come and go. And letting the attention sink in again to the direct experience. Not going through the thought process again as best as we can. Welcoming the air element at our abdomen, belly. And anything can happen. This movement can appear. It does appear differently and new every rising movement. Every falling movement. Look at that wise attention. Anything can happen. And receiving the delicacy and tenderness of this movement, just as it is, as it's happening, as it disappears. Whatever physical body sensations call the attention, moment to moment, wise attention. So there's a deepening of the abiding with things just as they are, just as they're appearing and disappearing. And with thinking that deepening of that understanding that anything can happen with thinking, any thought can appear. Not me, not I, not mine. So insubstantial. So compelling to believe every thought. When we see they're just coming and going by themselves, like the sounds, like the body sensation, like the movement of the breath. There's no need to fight them or believe them, take them personally. As best we can. But there's again that deeper abiding and making space for things to be just as they are. Just a thought, just a sound, just a body sensation. So that when emotions come, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, whisper of a thought, or an intense trigger, strong body sensations corresponding to the thoughts, very light, caressing body sensations, like sometimes with joy, or compassion, kindness. The unpleasant sometimes of fear, anger, loneliness, sadness. Or just being with things, life itself. Coming and going just as it is. That very gentle balance of care, tenderness, kindness sometimes, but the strength of the wisdom. Anything can happen. None of it is me or I or mine. Life revealing itself moment by moment.
Thank you, Michelle. Mm. Oh, when I was recently visiting some friends on the continent, one recommended I take a look at this book, The Animals' Lawsuit Against Humanity. And it's a very ancient story. It says in the introduction that the origins are from India, but it was first written down in Arabic by a Sufi Muslim scholar in Iraq in the 10th century. And then at some point in the 12th century, a Christian king asked a rabbi scholar to translate it into Hebrew. And so this is an adaptation of that text um, by a similarly um, wonderful group of uh, Muslim, Jewish, and Muslim scholars and artists. And it tells a story of a time where all of the domesticated animals were feeling incredibly oppressed by their human overlords and started to realize that they all shared this experience of oppressiveness in different ways amongst them. And they decided to rebel and to take matters into their own hands and approached the um, king and council of the jinn, the spirits, these royalty and wise sages from the spirit world, the devas, to bring humanity on trial for their abusiveness and their um, behavior towards them. And so you have this like incredible uh, story of all of these animals expressing the ways in which humans have been, unfair to them, oppressive to them, and abusive to them. And the humans, the leaders of the humans, for the most part, tend to be these expressions of our least admirable qualities. Their names are Azar, Gava, Hasad, cruelty, pride, jealousy, anger, sloth, lust, gluttony, greed, are the leaders of humanity and who kind of represent humanity in this trial. And it it goes it's, the devas are pretty clear for a while. It seems that there's a pretty good argument against us. Uh, and they decide to, adjourn for a day to consider their next options. And so you hear what the jinn are considering and uh, as a solution. And the animals start to get concerned, so they reach out to all the wild animals, asking them to help them, to testify against humans in this trial. And so that ends up happening as well. It unfolds that the the wild animals come and denounce the humanity in its various ways. And the humans keep talking about why they deserve to be masters and why they deserve to rule and how much superior we are than these animal beings. And the wild animals have a great way of responding with their own wisdom, right? Their own sense of the way the bees can construct hives and the way the birds make nests and the all these incredible abilities actually that humans are not the only ingenious ones. And in fact, we all have to learn these skills versus the animals being born with them. And it goes on, to the point where the animals even acknowledge it's not just us that they're abusing. Like they're killing each other all the time. These humans are really bad. At some point, the the insignificance of humanity compared to God is kind of the last big argument, and it functions to humble, all of the humans that were really kind of defending their behaviors. Things kind of quiet down, and I'll just read this portion of it here. It says, "Then Tawadu, which means humility, a man who had remained silent until now, took courage from the spirit sage's words. He pushed his way through the human assembly and came to stand in front of and Asar and the other human speakers. Although I am of small worth, I would like to respond to you both," he said meekly, looking at the king and his sage. "Speak," boomed the king. "O spirit sage from Balakis, your words are true and worthy of praise. There are humans who understand this. There are righteous people, pure and holy ones, sages, saints, inspired with the Holy Spirit, prophets, and other messengers of God, all of whom follow the way of love and kindness. The Creator appoints 36 of them in every generation to guide and sustain the world. When they die, their souls ascend to a dwelling place on high, and others are born to take their place. You may not believe it based on what you've seen and heard in this case, but there are many among us who strive to follow their teachings." As he spoke, a murmur began to ripple through the human assembly. One by one, various individuals began to voice support for what Tawadu was saying. Azar, Azar, and and their followers soon found themselves pushed to the back of the hall, and they slunk about dejectedly, looking looked about for exits, ready to make a quick retreat. Tawadu continued, "However, I too have one proof for human superiority," he began. Everyone looked at him in shock and silent horror, but before he could continue, monstrous tumult erupted in the assembly in reaction to his words. When the king finally silenced the hall and order was restored, Tawadu begged to continue. "I have one proof for human superiority," he repeated softly, "which paradoxically is no proof at all. As a result of Adam and Eve's choice, we humans have been both blessed and cursed with a moral conscience. We alone know good from evil. We alone know if we're following God's way or not. But there is the paradox. If we follow God's way, if we listen to our moral conscience, then we would not act arrogantly and treat other living creatures as if they were our slaves and we their masters. Were we humans to obey our consciousnesses, which we alone have, then paradoxically we would not be so proud nor act so haughtily. All would be in equilibrium. So my proof of human superiority is no proof at all. Do you see what I mean?" And those words kind of transform the whole dynamic. And the king of the spirit says, "If you humans would practice loving kindness, the animals would work willingly alongside you. Heaven and earth would come together and a gentle rain would fall. No one would need direction or instruction, and all things would take their course. If you humans understood this, life would be transformed and all would be at peace. If you wish to rule, you must serve with humility. If you choose to lead, you must learn what it means to follow. In this way, when you rule, the animals will not feel oppressed and they will not be harmed. The whole world will support you and not tired of you. Do you think you can rule the world and actually improve it? I do not believe it can be done. The world is sacred. You cannot improve it. You can only change yourself. And so it goes on. But the conclusion is that the humans all agree that they will try their best to abide by this pact, to live with the impulse of loving kindness and humility and outside of cruelty and arrogance, and try to live along these lines. And so we all live happily ever after, as you all know. That was how things got to be in such perfect equilibrium like they are now. Hmm. I don't have many encounters with people who feel very optimistic, about our future as a species, as a planet, as a on many levels. I think we are faced with so many catastrophes, that are the result of so much of these same patterns, of human arrogance, cruelty. We we live and all bear the burden, though not to the same degree, of the repercussions of those actions, and so much harm, so much ignorance. And so I know there's so many of us who are, really filled with a lot of anxiety and worry and horror, at the ways in which we see humans treating other humans, treating other beings on this planet, treating the natural world, treating themselves, treating ourselves, and how painful it is to bear that, and that we are living in a time where we bear it more than even just in our own daily direct experience. We bear it for certainly, in the ways that we treat ourselves internally and our minds, our bodies, and the ways that our families, interact and behave, and our communities and strangers, that we may encounter. We're also, of course, subject to so much news and social media and all kinds of media that show us, not only, but of course there is a number of reasons why, there's so much of what we see is so disheartening, the amount of cruelty, the amount of violence, the amount of greed that causes so much harm for so many people, toxicity of that, that's felt on every level, in the heart and the body and our everything we consume, whether it's food or story. And so this paradox, I think, that we do recognize also that I feel like there is this strange way that even if none of us have heard that story before, that there's something very familiar about it, that maybe we have a sense that we in some ancient lifetime, that we did try to make this pact, that we uh there's an echo of it in this lifetime, that we understand that we are trying our best, to live a life in accord with these beautiful sacred ambitions and holy aspirations, and how beautiful that is, and how unique that is, and how amazing that is, and that we do have examples of that in our own lives, or in history, or in the world around us. And yet it can often seem so out of overwhelmed by the forces of those other heart qualities, immoral qualities, have so much more power, in the world, in our lives, and sometimes even in our own hearts. That that humility of trying to be so aligned and cultivate these qualities, and to recognize, for even those of us who feel so committed to it, how hard it is to maintain it, how hard it is to develop it, how hard it is to confront our doubt, our worry, our anxiety, our anger, our own places of craving, of desire, when they arise, in our hearts, minds, bodies. And there are, of course, many aspects to how we, encourage folks to work with that dynamic, to feel this ambition, the spiritual ambitions, and these aspirations and these commitments in light of all of the obstacles that we face, internally and externally. And that, of course, there are solutions that are both internal and external, approaches, ways of attending to these that are real and that are effective. But usually, if they're working, they do create, more humility, that we are willing to face our deeper places of doubt, of confusion, the places where our ability to love is shakier, our ability to maintain equanimity and this equilibrium of heart is harder, in the face of certain sufferings, in the face of certain hardships. How do we find our way? How do we trust that the process is not always feeling more and more capable, more and more strong, um, more and more pure-hearted, right? That there are these spiraling, cyclical, complex paths that we follow to find our way into this quality of the sacred, of holiness. I've been reflecting a lot on the Visuddhimagga's um, framing of the practice of compassion, really understanding how important right now this ability to recognize pain, to recognize hardship, and to be able to care for it in a way that is stabilizing, that builds our sense of our heart's capacity to care, that transforms our own patterns of anger and cruelty into ones of non-harming and gentleness. the Visuddhimagga, the path of purification, this compendium text that, is for many years after the Buddha lived, the result of, many experiments and ways of trying to codify his teachings and exploring it, in the monastic community and the lay community. And, we are the inheritors of this beautiful lineage, some of it that the Buddha himself set down and is, when he, amazing that, I think he was 83 or 84 when he passed away. So he had a long teaching career, and there's so much material we have from that time, that was memorized and then written down, and these teachings that are about this process of purifying the heart, which are so incredible. And then we also have a lot of teachings and frameworks and developments, that have to happened after his lifetime of this, trying to find ways of codifying and um, making it easy to understand and to train, our hearts and minds. And so this comes from that, the path of purification. It says the compassion is characterized as promoting the aspect of allaying suffering. Compassion is characterized as promoting the aspect of allaying suffering. This quality that promotes the aspect of mind, of heart, that puts an end to suffering, right? That seeks to ease pain, that seeks to ease hardship. It's this impulse of mind that seeks to ease suffering. Its function resides in not bearing others' suffering, right? So this idea that it's like, actually, we're not, when we are feeling compassionate, when we connect with hardship, whether it's our own or someone else's, that it's not a continuation of suffering. It is not an augmentation of suffering. It is not a picking up of someone else's suffering. This is sometimes what we think that that's what compassion means. In fact, in the English word coming from whatever roots, it is my understanding. It's like that the roots of that have to do with that compassio, experiencing with. But karuna, the word that we use in our tradition we translate as compassion, doesn't have that quality of suffering with. It resides in not bearing other suffering. It is manifested as non-cruelty. A lot of times, again, in our tradition, it's the negation or the positive aspect. It's the same thing. So non-cruelty or the positive aspect of compassion, right? The ending of suffering, the offering of goodness, of kindness, of patience, of all of these beautiful qualities of heart. Restraint from harming, restraint from increasing suffering, right? The restraint from causing more harm. You've heard this. Its proximate cause is to see helplessness in those overwhelmed by suffering. Its proximate cause is to see the helplessness in those overwhelmed by suffering. It succeeds when it makes cruelty subside, and it fails when it produces sorrow. It succeeds when it makes cruelty subside, and it fails when it produces sorrow. Are we failing at our compassion? Is it another thing you should feel bad about? But I think it's a there's an intensity to that, obviously, right? And as we often will say, and just that reminder, it's not to say that it's wrong to feel sorrow or that it's wrong to feel frustration or helplessness or anger. This is not what it's saying. It's just pointing out that that is not karuna. Sorrow is not karuna. It's a different mind state and it produces different results. And that if we are really trying to practice compassion, practice the alleviation of suffering in impulse, in internal and external and speech gesture, that is a very particular quality of mind that is worth exploring, worth investigating, worth understanding. And I think a lot of it comes down to that particular moment of seeing the helplessness in those overwhelmed by suffering. And where can the heart bear that in a way that actually leads to non-cruelty, to leads to this opening of the heart versus leading to sliding into sorrow, distancing in that sense of pitying, uh, getting angry, getting furious, right? Exploding around how unjust, of course, so much of the suffering that we see is. So it's not saying it's just, it's not condoning suffering. It's not saying that these aren't understandable responses of the heart. But I do think it's like that sensitivity to that place of feeling the helplessness in those overwhelmed by suffering, whether it's our own hearts, minds, people around us, people we know of in the world. And where is our own inability to acknowledge that helplessness and that pinpoint accuracy of mindfulness that's needed to recognize it, right? And to not get caught up in just the other tendencies of blame, of story, of distancing, of drowning, of uh, whatever other fires may come through our experience of suffering, for ourselves or for others, our desire to defend, our desire to um, seek retribution. All understandable dominoes, that get knocked down when we encounter pain, when we encounter violence, when we encounter meanness, ignorance, oppressiveness in our lives and our world. It's this place where we see that the way that the Brahma Viharas, these of divine abodes of loving kindness, compassion, and sympathetic joy, the first three, are balanced by the fourth, by equanimity, and that they all have to have that balance internally, right? That there has to be some equilibrium of mind present in order to bear that helplessness, bear the vulnerability, the agitation, the worry, the distress, the agony, the insecurity, the instability that we feel in the heart, and it's again, it's like it doesn't matter what the object is. There might not ever be a very clear object. It might be a very clear object, something you see, something you hear, something you experience, something, and that vulnerability, that shakiness, that trembling of the heart is immediately there, arisen. Other times it's it's a very one little thought comes and we're barely even aware of it, and we feel this insecurity in the world, insecurity in life, in the future, in ourselves, in our own capacity to be free. And so there has to be some amount of stability and clarity of mind to see that, right? To see that moment arise and to pull back from the projection of what we think it's about, that it's out there, that it's because of this. It's like right now, that trembling is happening here, that worry, that shakiness, the agitation, the insecurity is happening here in the heart. Can we attend to it with care? Can we care about that pain? Right. And it doesn't have to be, we're directing it to ourselves, that it's like, may I be free. I mean, of course, if that works, we use whatever tools work, right? And one of the things we see in the tradition, there are a multitude of tools, of techniques. So much of the practice is finding kind of what works for us. But in different contexts, in different settings, different, we often will need different tools, different approaches. And so this, where is there enough honesty, enough humility to not always externalize the object? Oh, I'm sad about this. And it's like, yes, that's true. And where is the sadness happening? Where is the grief happening? Where is the sorrow? Where is the trembling? Where is the helplessness? And we can feel it here in the heart. And you have direct access to that experience, direct ability to connect with that caring, with that, to feel that tenderness. It's not often easy, obviously, but it's so much of our training, is how to do that. Another book a friend suggested in my travels. I don't always read this much, but taking what I can get. By Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, if I'm saying it right, who wrote The Little Prince. This is a book called Wind, Sand, and Stars about his time as a male pilot in the French service. And he tells this terrifying experience. It's a story of being stuck in a storm in the downslope of the Andes. He says at the end, he said, I could perhaps succeed in upsetting you if I told you some story of a child unjustly punished. As it is, I have involved you in a cyclone, probably without upsetting you in the least. This is no novel experience for any of us. Every week, men sit comfortably at the cinema and look on at the bombardment of some Shanghai or other, some Guernica, and marvel without a trace of horror at the long fringes of ash and soot that twist their slow way into the sky from those man-made volcanoes. Yet we all know that together with the grain in the granaries, with the heritage of generations of men, with the treasures of families, it is the burning flesh of children and their elders that dissipate in smoke, and slowly fertilizing those black cumuli. The physical drama itself cannot touch us until someone points out its spiritual sense. And I feel like it's such a powerful expression of this thing that the human heart does with pain, with horror, with atrocity, of finding distance, finding either sort of physical space, psychic space, spiritual space from the gravity of it. Because to move in and to actually feel the horror of it, that of course we risk drowning in it, you know, because we do, because that's a genuine concern, the overwhelm in the face of suffering, the helplessness that we feel in the face of suffering. And yet so much that is the task, right? Of both not drowning and not disconnecting from these patterns that we see internally and we see externally. And that it's this truth that our only hope in changing those patterns is being able to encounter them with loving kindness, with this compassion, with this caring for the hardship that is also rooted in the stability of understanding this is what happened. It's like this is what happens when this person does this to that person does that to that person. When these people do that to that person, these people do that to those people. The inevitability of history that comes with our inability to bear the intensity of harm, of pain, of sorrow, of the longings in the heart, right? The repulsions of the heart. And that it is only through mindfulness, compassion, that inevitability is destroyed, right? That actually there is choice, that there is a possibility of something new, possibility of something beautiful, something changing, something transforming, something that doesn't just replicate the patterns. And so this task that we have all chosen to, to abide by, this is not, no one has forced us into this. That it's like that's how important this is. We don't always see the social impact of that or the historical impact of that necessarily in our own lives or the community impact or um, but that is not the level at which we can be evaluating this, the sacredness and the duty and the responsibility of this charge we have taken up. Right now in Honolulu, there's this amazing, 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 amazing gathering happening. This Festpac, which happens every 4 years, a gathering of all of these Pacific nations to share with each other culture, art, traditions, all of the beauty that has been passed down through untold generations. It's not like of course there are people there as guests, as tourists, but it is not a tourist event. It is not like a expo. This is people from all of these nations gathering to learn from each other and to share with one another. And they had the opening convocation a few nights ago, many hours, of each island nation, coming and offering, gifts and presenting a song, a dance, a performance, an expression from their place and time in history. All of these nations so different and so unified in such this amazing way, and it is it is woven through culture. This is not a is not an explicitly political convening. It's not like the G whatever, how many G's there are at this point. G7 or I don't know how many nations there are. This is not a summit in that level in that way. And yet these expressions of people talking about, them from the Marshall Islands, over 40 nuclear bombs were dropped, just destroying islands, destroying so much, right? The windfall of that still being felt in terms of sickness in the ecosystem, in terms of the people. The amount of bombs that were dropped in Tahiti, where the French, and uprising happening right now in New Caledonia in response to the continued, French colonial experience. These people coming together and expressing how much they've lost, through militarism and colonization and the sickness and, you know, these forces of world history, and yet the the drawing of them together is through culture, through all of that, which is beautiful, and these ancient skills and skills and wholeness of the heart that require a wholeness of community, right? They're based on relational experiences with community of humans, of, their fellow people, but also with the plant world and with the animal world and star beings. And, this sense of what is left intact can still create an incredible beauty. Not to say, of course, that people don't have bitterness, that people aren't still in a lot of agony. People aren't still fighting for justice in the ways that they recognize and see and that are available to them. But there is an honoring of the understanding that, like, the beauty of culture, the beauty of cultivating all of these beautiful qualities, that come through being a student of weaving or carving or hula or chanting, and what one needs to, the spiritual process and work that has to happen to be fully committed to navigation, on the seas, that these build these beautiful qualities, and that these are the answer to repair, to creating a new way. Really inspiring, really beautiful, very profound. The first time it's happened in Hawaii, every 4 years a different island nation hosts. Sometimes the pain we may feel is too great to be with in the present moment. That um, in this practice, it's like, yes, we go with what's easy, we go with what's neutral, we follow the breath, we follow sounds, we try to build that sense of stability with objects that are easier to be with. And that we all are going to have these places that are more evocative, these karmic knots, these experiences in the heart, mind, body system, where it's very hard to find a place of care and balance, with something that arises. We're overwhelmed, we're confused, we're so identified. Ultimately, that is the part of the essential ingredient of these karmic knots, is that it's a place where we're just so identified with a belief about the, ourselves or the world, or some sort of negative self-belief. And so that we have to have other tools too. And sometimes we are not able to directly engage these things. We need to move outside of ourselves, and that's, also what is so beautiful about community, about friendship, about culture, Sangha, the idea that these things are ways that sometimes we don't have the resources in the moment to find our own goodness, to find a connection with that. It's amazing when I was again traveling last month. I visited some friends with their newborn baby. And I just was like, just so struck by this poor being having to come into existence, and like with wonderful conditions and beautiful, loving parents, and, you know, basic sense of safety, and yet just this like vulnerability of like all of these senses and this body and all this, like, in no, without the capacity of mind, of body, of brain, of body, of to understand what's happening, and the incredible discomfort that clearly this child is in, some of the times, and how amazing it was. It's like when we were sort of in the house, and there was this, like, just like, inexpressible dukkha of existence, of confusion and inability to express and probably even understand this wildness of internal and external stimulation, that was happening, to, take the baby outside and to go for a walk, and to have, it's like this fresh air and the sunlight and sounds, to be removed from the sort of internal confusion to this basic sense of pleasantness externally, how immediately soothing it was, to this baby, and how powerful that was to me, to just that reminder of, it's like sometimes we need to get outside of ourselves. We need this to get out of all of the kind of, oh, that can feel so small and so oppressive and so confining internally, and to go to something more beautiful, external, this relief of outside of this tumult. And the other day I spoke with my uncle, who was taking care of my grandfather, who's now in the stage of very much actively dying. And in a similar space, his mind is not clear. He's not able to communicate. He's very uncomfortable, physically, emotionally, mentally. There's like this, it's very hard. It's a very hard experience that he's going through. And it's like my uncle's like, oh, so we took him outside, and just like, oh, this sort of stimulation of the external. He started playing music. My grandfather was a musician and a music lover, and started playing some of the music that he had. And you could just see my grandfather relax, right? Again, it's like bringing in the beauty and the joy, something soothing outside of ourselves. How, what a relief that can be, how necessary. I found a record. I don't know, Rob a few weeks ago was talking about, I think, these Beethoven violin concertos. I don't know. I found an old record of mine of this Beethoven violin concerto. So I'm gonna say, like, oh, I'm gonna see what Rob's talking about. But I pulled it out and I must have left it in the sun or something. The record was all warped. I couldn't I couldn't receive the transmission. Of course, we have the streaming services that could, I will still check it out. But it's like I value that. I value, it's like this, the recognition of beauty, and the part of that that is just in the natural world, the parts of that that is cultural beauty, and how much we need that to survive, to make it through these times where we don't necessarily have faith in ourselves or our practice or the strength of our hearts and minds, to make it through. And that we remember to go outside of ourselves, to find stability, to find goodness, to be supportive of that, not just to offer it, but to receive it, right? To receive that goodness. When we're most in the experience of compassion, it doesn't have to be directional at all. It isn't. It's like this abiding in this caring for pain. And it isn't my pain or your pain. It doesn't have to be generated in any way. It's an abiding in this field of tenderness, of allaying of suffering, right? Of non-cruelty, of non-judgment, saturation of that, right? Internally, externally, physically, mentally, emotionally. We can generate that for ourselves and all beings internally. This is a capacity of the mind that's so important. And yet, yes, there are times where we need support, where we need to receive it. We need to be humble and recognize that we are not omnipotent, We struggle also. We need that support. We try to find our ways of getting it. I think you know, there's ways in which we may have a connection to a broader sense of culture that's beautiful, that may be an ancient lineage of culture. There may be ways that we feel disconnected from that. There may be ways that and of course, times, no matter what, that we feel like, that isn't we don't have, that's not the solution to our pain either. But, there is something that we are also responsible for. We cannot just make culture. We can't just make uh, traditions and mythology, happen. But to know that this is a part of the human heart and that is real and that is meaningful is so important. And this been reading about some of the what are they ethnoastronomy, from Latin America, these beautiful stories of this one small tribe in Honduras and their sense that the sky is like just this alternate world. It's like a sort of opposite world from the world we're living in. And so that their world is a jungle world, you know. And so that the night sky is that we're seeing the jungle of this other world with through this veil. It's their daytime. And what we see is all the stars are the sun's reflection in the eyes of all of the monkeys in the jungle. Mm. You know, just imagine that sense of like connection and playfulness and the companionship, right, of that. The Inca thought of the Pleiades amongst many other things. They thought of the Pleiades cluster as a kind of storehouse of all of the beings and plants and animals that there are uh, like it was where they stored all of the reciprocal beings. This the heavenly versions of everything down here is there, and that the stars and planets are responsible for taking care of them there, and so that has a reciprocal experience here, right? That's how we are in part attended to by these beings that are caring for us, through this transmission from the stars, this relationship, this dynamic. Many, many stories of the the ways in which the cycles of rain and seasons are shown in the movement of the sky, and when the waters come down, that is when the constellations of certain elements come down. That is when the times of the rain come, and that humans have their part in protecting those and replicating those and honoring those so that the cycles continue. We can't just make things up and expect them to, create a culture out of just ideas. It has to be based on, lived material experience. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't take some responsibility for that, that we aren't just beholden to the constellations that, like, Ptolemy or whatever handed down. We can see these things freshly, newly. I somehow last month I was watching the Orion, and all I could see was it as a butterfly. I couldn't see the Orion anymore. I was like, God, it looks so much like a butterfly. That may or may not persist in my life as a asterism, as they call them. But to recognize that we can each have our own relationship with these stars, these constellations, that culture is also something internal. It is also something that we experience and produce and have some responsibility for. That we are what we generate, the way we interact with people, the the roles we play in our households, our families, our communities. What we're creating it's the perpetuation of something. You know, where are we taking responsibility for that? Where are we trying to bring something good? You know, there's much of the wholeness and beauty of our own hearts in our interactions. It's not nothing. You know, to what degree does that transform the world? I think there's a big conundrum, you know. I think the more we practice, the more the beautiful things we come into relationship with internally. I think the often, you know, the more hesitant we are about power, control, you know, authority, and that you see those of us who are more fascinated with that, more compelled by it, can be hard to maintain that connection with these beautiful qualities, you know. So there are some conundrums that, you know, that we have to figure out around that for ourselves, for our world. But it's an important conundrum, you know, maybe the most important. And when we're up for it, that sense of our charge and our responsibility, you know, this, you know, whether we were there at that trial of humanity with the birds or not, and all the other animal beings, or whether we show up in this life with the understanding of the dynamics, you know, internal to humans or in our relationships to the world, and we see that we aspire to not perpetuate the harm and the pain and the suffering. We aspire to relate to each other and all beings in a different way. You know, how beautiful that is, how difficult a position that is, difficult a path that is, and yet how important, how sacred, how worthy. Yeah. So thank you all for being in our walking group, trying to move forward together in this good way, you know, with all of our struggles and doubts and things that, of course, we encounter, you know, missteps for sure. Um, but that we're trying, it feels good to be part of the community of those trying, you know, and that there are many of us, many, many, many in this world, whether we know them or not, whether we have relationships with them or not, you know, and that there have been many that we're part of an ancient lineage, you know, beyond the Buddhist one of people trying. Mm, it's a good lineage to be a part of. Mm. So take care, everyone. Thank you for your practice internally and externally. And we will see you next week, according to the plan. And but it will be a little different. Just a reminder that next Sunday and the following Sunday, we will be in our online course, the online retreat, Seeing Security Everywhere. And so the Sunday sitting will still be happening. It'll be a new link that we'll send out just for those 2 weeks, but it'll really just be the Dhamma talk each for the next few Sundays of the for the course. So there won't be a sitting part. It'll just be the talk. And we look forward to seeing everyone there. Those of you who are participating in the retreat, whether it's the weekend or the full time or part time through the week, whatever works for people, we're excited to get back into that kind of programming. And then if you're just able to join us for the Sundays, that's wonderful too. And we look forward to seeing you. Okay, take care, everyone.